petition has been posted on Twitter, apparently signed by dozens of Russian city councillors calling on President Putin to resign. More than 80 deputies from 35 municipalities in Moscow and St. Petersburg described Mr. Putin's actions as detrimental to the future of Russia. The recent setbacks for Russia has led to pro-Kremlin commentators who'd previously been unstinting in their support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine now openly criticize Moscow's war plans. Well, for the very latest, we can cross live to Kyiv and speak to AP correspondent John Gambrell. Good to see you, John. We're seeing the Ukrainians claiming that they've recaptured large swathes of territory. We've heard the Russians saying that they're counter-attacking from the air. How big a moment is this militarily in the war in Ukraine?
We're still trying to see exactly what the Ukrainians are going to do next and how the Russians are going to respond. As you say, this is a pretty big moment. Some analysts have even described it as on par with when the Ukrainians stopped the Russians from taking Kyiv at the start of the war. Now, over the last couple of weeks, we've seen the Ukrainians take some 6,000 square kilometers, as you said earlier. And just to put that into context, that's twice the size of Luxembourg. I mean, this is a huge area in both the south and the northeast that the Ukrainians have been able to take back. And something that's really interesting is the fact that the Ukrainians are starting to edge closer to territory that Russia took back in 2014, whether that be Donetsk and Luhansk in the east of the country or the Crimean Peninsula in the south. These are areas that President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that he is wanting Ukraine to take back. He wants to regain all this territory. The Russians have fallen back. There is some discussion about what the Russians are going to do next. Now, we don't have a really good idea of where the front lines are. We do believe that they're still fighting in some of the areas in Kharkiv, though it seems to be predominantly held by the Ukrainians. But whether or not the Ukrainians can continue to push forward and whether or not they can continue to be armed by the West with these long-range weapons, tanks, and other material really remains the question on how this war is going to move forward in the coming months.
Absolutely. And of course, politically, John, this push is important for the Ukrainians, isn't it? I mean, because they want to show that the weapons that they've been given, they can put to good use. And also they want to make sure that if there is any softening of support from Europe or NATO, they want to be able to say that they can win this.
Charles, you're absolutely right. This is one of these things moving forward that the Ukrainians, they haven't really acknowledged feeling pressure, but you have to keep in mind the Ukrainians have received billions of dollars in support from America alone, not counting the other support they've received from NATO countries, the training they've received from Britain with troops going to Britain to learn how to do basic soldiering. They've received a lot of aid from the West, and the Ukrainians wanted to push forward. They wanted to push forward primarily because we're coming up closer and closer to winter. The winter months, it's very difficult for armed conflict. The ground gets wet. We've already seen rain over the last couple of days here. Wet terrain makes it more difficult to move these heavy tanks and other armored personnel carriers. So the Ukrainians had a moment when it came to the weather as well as the timing, as well as with the material, that they needed to push forward. They needed to show that they were a solid fighting force to be able to challenge the Russians. And a lot of the analysts that we've spoken to say that they have. They've been able to make these gains. They've been able to show that these weapons are crucial to their advance, but they're still continuing to ask for more. Most notably, they're continuing to ask for more longer-range missiles from the Americans. The Americans have been hesitant to supply them, though, so far, because they're worried about the Ukrainians potentially being able to use them to target inside of Russia as well. But, you know, these missile systems that we've already seen on the ground, these HIMARS missiles from America, have really proved crucial in disrupting logistic flows as well as ammunition dumps that the Russians had, and really set the stage for this breakout that we see now.
And of course, we just saw earlier that petition that's been posted on Twitter, apparently signed by dozens of Russian city councillors calling for President Putin to resign. I mean, if it looks like Mr. Putin is losing this war, what might he do? Because, I mean, he just doesn't look like the sort of chap who would say, you know, we made a mistake, let's all go home and have a jolly nice Christmas.
That's true, Charles. It's really tough to know what Putin is going to do next. I mean, he really has based what he's described as the special military operation, which was the Russian invasion of Ukraine. He described it as trying to denazify Ukraine when it had a Jewish leader, as trying to change Ukraine, to bring it back into Russia, sort of these same ideas that we saw during the Soviet era. Now, he's not been able to do that. In fact, he's actually on the brink of potentially seeing gains that his country made back in 2014 eaten away at. That has some analysts concerned about what Putin may do next. As you said, could he call a general mobilization to bring more troops in? He hasn't done that yet, but he could. Could he also threaten other attacks? We've also seen concerns about cyber attacks across Europe. Russia does have, through its military intelligence and other intelligence agencies, a pretty strong cyber capability. Now, we don't know what they're going to do. You did mention these politicians who are starting to agitate and make more noise about Putin's leadership so far, but it's been interesting to see that on state television and other places, while there's criticism of the overall overarching war strategy, criticism of Putin himself still remains a pretty clear red line, and that could subject people to arrest or worse in that country.
John, thanks ever so much for that analysis. The AP correspondent John Gambrell talking to me there from the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv.